So let's all have a seat. If you guys want to join us. Okay. Jen, would you mind hitting play on the? Okay, good. So we are broadcasting this live to somewhere between 1 and 2 million people, or at least between 1 and 2. Just so everybody knows. Welcome everybody. This is the August 2015 edition of Stories of Beer. My name is Nick Astor. I'm the founder and publisher of TriplePundit.com. This is a monthly event which we host here at Hub San Francisco. Can we close the door? Is that okay? Thanks. Here at Hub San Francisco, where we have a casual conversation about a different topic every month. Has anybody not been to the Hub before? Awesome. That's where you're sitting right now. This is sort of a combination co-working space and incubator. Everybody here has some kind of social or environmental mission to what they do. A lot of nonprofits, a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals. If you want to learn anything more about it, talk to me or Jen here, and we're happy to connect you. Anyone not familiar with TriplePundit? Good. We have some stickers actually, which I know you guys want, so feel free to take one. And a few of you guys are new to Stories of Beer. So anyway, the topic tonight is something that we've been sort of struggling with for a really long time. It's a huge topic. It's essentially the role of the tech boom in building a better world. What does it mean to be a responsible tech company, in particular within the context of San Francisco? As everybody knows, there's a huge boom going on right now. San Francisco's under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of money moving into the city. Housing prices are going up. That's kind of nothing new, but it seems like it's particularly acute right now. There's a lot of tension in the air. It's a topic that has a lot of different tendrils associated with it, which we could spend hours talking about any given one of them. But we're going to try to kind of focus tonight's conversation on the city itself and what is the role of the tech community or these huge tech companies with all of their money and all of their influence and power in preserving what we love about this city, which is its arts and its community and its livability and everything else that all those other adjectives that we throw around. So without further ado, I'd like you guys to just give us a little 2 or 3 minute introduction to who you are, and then we'll get down into the conversation. And before we do, Jen, do you want to say a few words about the Beacon campaign that we're kicking off? Okay, this is another exciting announcement that we have.
Today, actually, we soft launched a new campaign where we're going to be continuing the conversation that we start tonight on it's called Tech Titans Community Citizens, and we'll be looking at the housing impacts, the transportation impacts, and the service economy impacts of all of these big companies that are coming in to our area. So looking specifically at how they are interacting with the community. And we are crowdfunding that through Beacon, which is a journalism crowdfunding site. And we will be sharing more information about that in the coming weeks.
Great, thanks a lot, Jen. So let's get it rolling. Tell us a little bit.
Hi, I'm Lila LaHood. I'm the publisher of the San Francisco Public Press. We're a nonprofit, non-commercial news organization doing local public interest journalism online at sfpublicpress.org and in a quarterly print newspaper. If you want to see the newspaper, I'll pull up a copy of it. Can you hear me? Is this?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. So we cover local public interest issues. Our most recent issue was looking at how cities around the Bay are addressing new development on the Bayfront in light of consensus projections for sea level rise. And one of the things we discovered was that there's such a boom in development, both in terms of housing and business, that there's not a lot of long-range planning looking at what's going to happen 30, 50, 80 years out when sea level rise becomes an issue in these areas, many of which will be underwater. The current topic for our upcoming issue is looking at cost of living in San Francisco. So I'm sure we're going to be discussing things today that are relevant to them. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Rob Joyce. I'm part of the team at Full Circle Fund. We're a nonprofit that is housed here in the hub. We have an office upstairs. We've been around for 15 years, and we're a network of individuals. So we have 180 members who make an annual donation. They leverage their funds, their time, their network, and their skills to help a portfolio of nonprofits that's chosen every year. And that's been going on for 15 years. This year we have 12 grant partners, including Defy, who I think is having an event in there. And in last year, almost exactly a year ago, we launched a program called Founders Pledge. And we wanted to take this notion of leveraging resources to accelerate positive social change and apply it to the startup sector. The question was, how do we help early stage companies do good and do good from the start? Rather than succeed and then figure out how to do good. And it's been an exciting journey. We have 29 companies who've made the pledge, and we're building out the program and finding ways to provide meaningful context to that commitment. And it's been a really fun journey, and it's been very pertinent, these kind of conversations around what are the issues that the city, our region, our communities, and all the individuals who live in them are facing. And how can we all work together to make a better world to live in? Thanks.
Great. So my role in this conversation is to kind of get it going and to ask a couple of questions of these guys. But really, ultimately, this is going to be up to you guys to keep this conversation going. So start thinking about smart questions and things that you want to talk about. Otherwise, I'll just keep asking questions all night. But Rob, I wanted to start with you actually, and of course, Lila, you're invited to get involved with this as well, but before we get into sort of the impacts on the city itself, you talked about this idea of a company kind of doing good from the get-go, as it were, and I'd kind of like to hear what you meant by that. Earlier tonight, we were talking about there being a bit of a disconnect or even a silo effect between the idea of businesses over here and business does what it does, and then over here there's the let's do good for the world silo, and they don't necessarily talk, and just tell me a little bit about that and what it really means to be a company that quote unquote does good, whatever that means.
I think one thing that illustrates it is when we describe Founders Pledge and the goals of our companies who make the pledge, and that pledge, by the way, is raising your hand saying, I'm going to pledge 1% of equity to ultimately go to nonprofits. And then what we want to do is provide meaningful resources and tools to take that intention and build a company culture around it. And we don't use the term give back anywhere in that description because we think that perpetuates this idea of we have our focus on our thing, and then when we're done, we decide how much we want to give back to sort of make up for what we ignored or what we weren't paying attention to along the way. So that's I think a fundamental shift, and I think it's a fundamental demand that founders and entrepreneurs have now. If you look at the history of philanthropy, you had, instead of tech titans, you had railroad titans, or you had industry titans who spent their life doing what they were doing and building their companies. And then, it was a second thing they did. It's like, okay, now I'm going to do something. People want to not only build great companies now, but they want to have a positive effect in the world. And feel like they're sharing what they're doing beyond simply a profit motive. And I think there's the fact there's a thirst for that and a demand for it is really inspiring.
But do you have a response to that? Have you seen that concept playing out through your own interaction with not necessarily tech, but business in general?
Well, I think San Francisco has a long history of companies giving back to the community, although as we were talking about earlier, it's not consistent across the board. So some companies are very good about being good corporate citizens and generating a lot of goodwill in the community, and others are not, and I'm not going to pick on any in particular. And I think we're seeing the same patterns with smaller companies and newer companies in all sectors. So, yeah.
That's good. Back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, and sort of the I guess, is it preservation? Is it protection? The things that we love about San Francisco. Tell me a little bit about what you feel, or what you've seen other people say they feel is under threat, and what is that threat? Is it just existential change, or is there something real going on?
it is not just equity change. I was thinking about the way that this discussion was being framed, and the idea that what can we or what can companies do to help preserve, arts and culture and diversity and civic engagement. And I think if you want to preserve all of those things, you have to think about preserving the community. And the community is people. It's people who live here. It's organizations that have been around for a long time. And I think we have to ask ourselves, everyone here, what do we want to protect? Because you have to think about who has the power, the money, and the influence, and who doesn't have the power and the money and the influence. And a lot of those individuals and organizations who are vulnerable are going to need some protection. And the question is, does that protection come through philanthropy and through companies who are trying to do good in the community? Does it come from government protections? And there are a lot of different options, and that's why this is, I think, a good discussion to have.
Tell me a little bit about who those people might be, and what kind of protections are we talking about? Is it a matter of funding coming from one source or another, or is it more than that?
Well, I think anyone in this room would say, if we said what is the biggest problem in San Francisco right now, what is the fundamental problem? And I think it's the cost of housing, and it affects a lot of people. But if we're talking about who needs protection, it's the people who are in vulnerable living situations because they're renting. Maybe the rent is very low because of rent control, and if they're in a desirable neighborhood, the place where they live is threatened. So the question is, what kinds of, do we want to, or do we as a community decide to protect people in certain ways? Do we need to improve our laws that protect tenants? And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to tell you what I think. I think this is a question for our community, but it's an important thing to consider, because if you lose the people who make up all of those things we're talking about, the arts and the culture and the diversity, that community you're trying to preserve no longer exists. I don't know how to have things to say about this.
I think one of the sort of consistent threads of these problems have a lot of complexity to them. If there was an answer to housing issues, then I think we would be having different conversations. So I think if we get out of the blame game and instead say let's acknowledge that there's a problem, that there's a crisis, and let's acknowledge that whether or not I intend to be or not, my very presence here, the very fact that I started my company here, the very fact that I am hiring people here, whether or not I have good or bad intentions, it has an effect. And so just acknowledging that and then saying, I want to be part of a solution, and I want to forward these values of having a community where people can afford to stay, where families have the resources to for their kids, where we're building good schools and improving schools. Let's sort of start the conversation from that point and start, instead of a defensive place of, well, it's not my fault. We should have built more housing. Well, we didn't build more housing, and so we are here now. What can we do? And let's explore some creative solutions to that, and maybe some things we haven't tried before.
Yeah, please.
So last year, the public press actually hosted an event here at the Hub called Hack the Housing Crisis, and I think we did some of what you're talking about, which is looking at, because you can't say there's not one solution to the housing problem. You don't just do this one thing and it fixes everything. So what we did was bring in experts to talk about a lot of different possible solutions. So looking at auxiliary dwelling units and about the current inclusionary housing program and how that might be modified, and a lot of other different models. Because it isn't a one-dimensional thing, and I think you're right that it's too easy to say that this was caused by one thing or another, but what are the ways of addressing it? And I think that there are multiple solutions, both to preserve existing housing, to protect people who are here already, and to create additional housing. And we sorely need more below market rate housing. I mean, I think that's probably pretty clear.
All right, I have two more questions, then I want you guys to jump in on this, but I want to continue with what you guys both left off. bring us back to the topic at hand, which has to do with what's the role of the tech community. You started talking about this hack the housing crisis thing. That sounds like a great place to start. Tell me a little bit about some of the solutions that were proposed or that may have come out of that event. And then Rob, I'd love to hear what you have to say about some of the companies that you've worked with, some of the folks who have taken this pledge, particularly in the tech sector, who've come up with their own, solutions or at least salves on this issue, the housing issue specifically.
So the funny thing is, we called it Hack the Housing Crisis, and we have to admit that we stole that from tech. So it was an event that was a hybrid event where in the morning we had experts come and speak, and then in the afternoon we had breakout groups. And those breakout groups decided to define their own topics. Some of them picked up on some of the issues that the experts presented in the morning. Others had their own ideas for new sort of, I think, plans to organize and get people in their community involved in the discussions. On our website, there's a good coverage of what was discussed there. As I said, some of the things are actually in the news now and being considered now. Actually, this fall, the Board of Supervisors is going to be talking about I don't know if it's modifying the current density bonus program or a new plan where in parts of the city where buildings can currently be 6 stories tall, they would allow an increase up to 8 stories if a certain percentage of that is designated for low-income and middle-income housing. So, that's one solution we discussed. Others were, as I said, auxiliary dwelling units, which would be, maybe adding an in-law building in your backyard or turning some currently not legal units and making them legal so that people who live there would have fuller protections.
Yeah, I don't know that, in the year we've been around, we've have a lot of solutions that are put forward. I think it's a lot about being open to having a conversation. But it's the intention to leverage resources is there. So I think, one example would be, I heard a few years ago, the idea of floating a $1 billion housing bond. It's like, how can we possibly, make up, for lost ground as far as building housing? Getting a group of people together who have said, I want to designate some financial resources to something, and saying, okay, let's make a commitment like that would be something. But that's at the resource level. I think at the understanding level and at the having a conversation level is something that has to be happening concurrently. This is where you have a lot of young people coming who have not grown up here. These issues are all new. And if you're creating a company culture where those conversations happen, where you care about the impact of what's going on, you care about the families that live in 2 blocks away from where your office is, I think that's an important step. Because then those very employees, if they want to be happy working there, if they want to, and if they want to, tell their talented friends that they should be working there too, that it's going to be important to them that the leadership of the company and the founders are involved in conversations about solutions rather than simply ignoring the fact that a problem is there. And I think there's lots of good intention, and I think that's the great thing. And I think the conversations are happening more than they were a couple of years ago.
Another thing that you had mentioned earlier is the regional nature of all of this, and that's probably going to bring that up.
I was going to bring it up. It's part of the kind of a framing thing, and then it's on you guys. So get your questions ready. The question is, this is really about housing, which is the probably fundamental issue, as everyone has been mentioning, and I think that a lot of what's happening here isn't really caused by the tech boom per se at all, although it clearly exacerbates the situation. But really, it's a good thing. It's a fundamental rediscovery of urbanness in the United States, which basically anyone, our generation or younger, has begun to fully embrace, and even older generations as well, as we've sort of turned our back on the strip mall suburbia that America became starting in roughly the 60s until probably the 80s and beyond. And there's all sorts of good reasons for that. People looking for something that's more of a community, people looking for something that's more diverse, people looking for a place where they can walk and have a more human scale kind of lifestyle. And the problem, of course, is that particularly in the Western United States and in California, there's just an absolute dearth of supply. There is very little truly urban environment in this state. And so next thing you know, you get a lot of money and a lot of young people, and coupled with many of the other desirable factors here, you simply have a supply and demand problem. Therefore, if we're going to point fingers at somebody, we should be pointing our fingers at the city planners of Mountain View and Palo Alto and San Jose every bit as much, or if not more so, as we should at the tech companies and the wealth and the everything else. Because if you found a way to redevelop all of those parking lots down there on El Camino Real and turn them into something resembling a human scale environment, you would radically reduce the demand on a place like San Francisco. You wouldn't eliminate it because it probably would still be nicer, but you'd greatly improve the situation. And I'm just kind of curious to hear if you agree with that. And you know, as we try to hack this problem, so to speak, there seems to be a lot more going on, especially regionally speaking, than just let's look to the Silicon Valley money itself to solve the problem.
So I think you're right. I mean, this is, the housing issue is a regional issue, and we need more on the peninsula. And I have to say, so we would joke about this, but it's only half joking, that the solution to San Francisco's housing problem is if we could make San Jose cool, everything would be great. But, and that wasn't, well, that was a dig against San Jose. And there are lots of wonderful things about San Jose, but, you know, sometimes I wonder, you know, why couldn't we, you know, or why doesn't someone who has big ideas about new forms of urbanism say, okay, you know what, I'm going to go in and try to create this in San Jose? Or is the problem that what's so wonderful about San Francisco, this thing that we're worried about losing, is something that developed organically over time and it can't be replicated, yet we're at risk of losing some of that. So what do we do?
Yeah, I'd point to, there's a recent announcement made by the San Francisco Foundation about a $34 million investment in Oakland, and a comprehensive investment. That was housing. It was STEM for kids who didn't have access to it before. So, you know, that I think those kind of that regional approach is happening, and I think it's also happening with a granular level to it as well. That I would put forward as a model. That's something that happened out of the foundation world, that can be a model for startups and tech companies that want to come together and pool resources and look for solutions, and then look for a suite of partners to implement those solutions around. And I think just as, you know, pigeonholing business and social good is not necessarily going to be an effective way. I think pigeonholing the issues is probably not the wisest choice either. And it was just, I was just really inspired when I saw that. I was like, okay, this is a comprehensive approach to how can we leverage resources, not just pick my pet issue or the thing that's most important to me, and I'm going to focus it all there, but I'm going to look at how can we take a whole region and lift it up.
Excellent. Who's got a question or something to tell us? In the back, and then we'll look at you.
Hi, my name's Krista, and I just moved here from Greenville, South Carolina, which is a very different town and very small. It was built by BMW and Michelin in order to make it more attractive so people would come. So it's kind of the opposite problem.
What do you mean built by it? Like
they poured money into it. We did the Main Street. Brian, they donated a lot of money to arts foundations so that it's a desirable city to live in. So it's kind of the opposite problem of they want to bring people in. But my question, in that situation, it's very clear that it benefits companies because they want to attract talent. They want to make it a desirable place to live. And similarly, you could say in San Francisco, it's beneficial for companies to invest in more housing opportunities and to preserve culture because they want happier employees that can, you know, would like to move there and are like, oh, I couldn't afford anything. But beyond that, what reasons in the conversations that you have had do companies give for wanting to for wanting to help with the housing crisis, for thinking that it's in their best interest? Are they struggling at all with their employees right now? Is that something that's just going on in my head?
It is different than Greenville for sure. What do you guys? There's almost a funny opposite effect sometimes, isn't there? What's your reaction to that?
You know, I think part of it is this perception of that's government's problem or that's government policy problem is eroding away. And I think we're seeing more collaboration, not just between the private sector and nonprofit sector, but also involving government proactively, government reaching out, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. But I think that's, you know, when you give the example that you gave, South Carolina, that sounds to me like a private entity sort of driving public policy and public improvement. San Francisco is an enormous ecosystem that, you know, no one company by itself is going to be able to, make a dent in some of these very complex problems we have. But working together and engaging partners from whether it's community organizations that have for decades been working on these issues and have a deep understanding of the complexity of them, having allies in government who are looking for new ideas rather than insisting on retreading old ideas, I think is a very promising start.
So you were asking why should companies care? Why? So well, I think they have to care.
Because it's already so perfect here.
Well, no, not only that. I mean, it's beautiful and it's wonderful here, and their employees want to live here, so the companies want to locate here, so they can attract the best employees. That's the nice side of it. The challenging side of it for why they have to care is they not only have to create a nice environment for their employees. At this point, I mean, you've all heard there's a lot of backlash against, especially tech companies. And I think, as you were saying earlier, we don't want to vilify people and paint with broad brushstrokes. But I think the companies and people who work at these companies are realizing that they need to generate some goodwill and to be responsive to the community, because there are a lot of people who are upset by the, and again, we don't want to say tech companies cause this, but I think they have had impact, and they're easy to identify. And I think that they are seeing that they have to respond, otherwise they're going to continue to face this this backlash.
Before we go with you and have the next question, Joe, can we talk about Twitter as an example? Because that's an example of a company that, unlike most Silicon Valley companies, which have historically been in Silicon Valley because it was inexpensive and I guess they weren't as concerned about living in an interesting place at that time, Twitter decided to move to the city. Twitter got a very good deal from the city, but Twitter has started to make some investment in the neighborhood a few blocks from here, which has had its issues. There's controversy about whether Twitter is just writing a few checks to some nonprofits and saying, hey, that's great. And others saying, no, they're actually making some real headway and getting a little bit more involved in the community. Can we talk about them as an example of a company that maybe is making an investment in that particular area, or your opinions on whether that investment is everything it's cracked up to be?
Well, that investment was not an option. That was part of the deal, and I think as it's rolling itself out and being implemented, I think we're learning a lot of ways that it can be done better. I think there was no secret that there was a lack of communication when it was first being implemented. It was like, okay, we have these resources, we're obliged to spend them, and I think there was some outcry that the folks who live there, the folks who have been active in the community for years, weren't being involved in the conversation about how to best implement that. And again, that I think that was a good lesson about sort of, again, breaking down this, like you're on one side of the table and I'm on the other, and said, let's, start the conversation earlier about what, and listen. Not I'm going to give back, but I want to work with you instead of designing for this community, designing solutions for this community, designing solutions with the community. And I think you're seeing some quick iteration around that. And it's about being good citizens. So, but back to your question, because I don't think I really answered it around, why do companies want to do this? I think it is a very important motivation that they want to attract top talent, and the top talent wants to live in San Francisco right now. I think it's a very desirable place to be. But I think there's people are the ones who found these companies, and who assume that they need to be convinced to be good citizens, that they're automatically from a place where they don't care. I think is not an accurate portrayal. So I think there is a very deep human motivation as well. There's more and more data about the business benefits of building a social-minded culture, about employee attraction, about talent retention, about brand alignment. People will spend so much more for your product if they think that you're part of what they're spending is going to doing good. There are all these business motivations as well, but there are people who are making a choice to make this a priority for their companies and saying, you know what, as I make a fortune here in San Francisco, I want to make the city a better place too. I want the city to be fortunate as part of my fortune. And I think we're seeing that. And let's not assume that that's not the case, or that everybody needs to be convinced to do good. I think there's plenty of evidence that people want to do good, but we're still learning the mechanisms for how to do that effectively.
Could I ask a question about Twitter? Because I think you probably know more about where it is now. I know that early on, one of the things that forgive me if I don't have the exact details on this, I think they had committed to doing a certain amount of hiring within the neighborhood. And I believe they said that it was difficult because they couldn't find people with the right skills. I'm wondering if any of the more recent iterations have involved any training to get jobs for those people, or if there was some other sort of modification to fulfill that promise. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about the details of that arrangement. I do know that there's a certain amount of money that has to be spent. And if I'm not mistaken, there's probably people in this here who know the details more than I, but they just opened a training center that they funded specifically to help people in the neighborhood get the skills, get tech skills. So I think that's an example of, I think, responding to the needs that were once they were voiced, once there was a sort of channel of communication to say that, to say, hey, then provide those resources. If your issue isn't there are enough people with the training, then train them. And so I think that's an example of things going in the right direction. Again, I might not be entirely right on the details. If somebody knows them better, I'd love to hear.
My question has evolved now, but it's similar to a little bit. But combining the Greenfield example with the Twitter example, so is an interesting solution, or should it be incumbent on these larger tech companies that their company headquarters are like mini ecosystems, like a mini village, to move into places like Oakland or into the more emerging neighborhoods around San Francisco? And then have the same requirements that Twitter had, granted only a few blocks away from here, to train and hire people within neighborhoods. And then the second question I asked is, what if we leave housing off the table for a little bit and go into what else can the tech communities be doing to improve the city in terms of arts and in terms of culture, and in terms of just simply creating service-minded communities within their companies.
That's like, is it working? You did lose the mic. Test, okay. No, that's a terrific whole set of questions, isn't it? And it's funny because I would also add, there's also an opposite incentive, which is not just what does it take to move a company like, maybe Google or whatever to some part of Oakland and have it be somehow figure out how to way to imbue that into the community and make investments and so on. But it's also, how do you make their current situation more tenable? I mean, imagine if you took every one of Google's parking lots and turned it into some kind of housing, even if it was just for Google employees, it would probably be more interesting and more vibrant than it currently is. And then, of course, there's that deeper question that Joe asked, which is, taking housing off the table. There's a lot more to this than that. And what's your reaction to that? Because it's not just let's be philanthropic. It's not just let's raise money. It's not just let's fund. I mean, that's part of it. But I feel like there's something deeper there, and it goes back to that original silo question that you brought up, Rob. And I'm curious what your response would be to that question.
Yeah, I think the idea of a contained ecosystem that you brought up, I think is a really interesting place to start, because I think that's a shift of what a tech company looks like. If you look at a Mountain View campus where you're there and you're there all day, you don't leave, you have a single place you eat. I think that was what was being replicated in an urban environment a lot of times. And I think that the fact that doesn't work, or that doesn't necessarily make sense, or that's being an isolated cell where people come up from uni, they walk in and then they don't leave, and then they go out and they're done. I think there's a concerted effort to go against that. I think it's Zendesk that might have pick a day a week where it's actually proactively encouraged to go out and eat in a restaurant somewhere in the neighborhood.
They should close the cafeteria for that.
I don't know that they do, but I just know that there's Tuesday go out and eat in the neighborhood, and so that the second generation restaurant 2 blocks away that has a great banh mi sandwich is something that you're experiencing, rather than waiting in line with a tray and never leaving to go get one that was brought in by a caterer. I think that's a very different opportunity. When you look at what are the opportunities when you have a bunch of 20-somethings moving from all over the world to be here, guess what? They need to put something up on their walls. How can we encourage them to buy their art from local artists instead of ordering prints online? I mean, those are the kind of, how can we integrate the new people who are arriving with the communities that are here? And I think we're starting to see some solutions. I think there's lots more if we think in that way, rather than again keeping the us and them in place. Like, okay, you're a tech person and I'm part of the arts person, and you have lots of resources and I don't. Instead of, okay, you're here, I'm here. What are we going to do together? Let me show you my art. So anyway, I'm rambling now.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the things you said though about more integrating these communities is really important, because otherwise you can say, oh look, now here's this company that came to San Francisco and is in this neighborhood, but is it integrated with this neighborhood, or did it just take its campus and overlay it? And are the people who work there only interacting with each other in a certain collection of businesses? And I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. One word that we haven't brought up at all is gentrification. And I don't know. I feel like the audience should be talking more, and maybe not so much. I don't know. It's challenging. And how do you encourage people? You have people who work in a company, they're supposed to be talking to their colleagues. There's probably also some fear of you don't want ideas slipping out, but how do you encourage more engagement with other people in the community, with other people working at similar businesses, so that, yeah.
I'll go on with that, but Judy had a question.
I want to say, Rob, I really admire your optimism a lot. I want to get there. I'm not quite where you're at, but I have a question actually. Okay. So I think about that housing situation quite a bit, and I also think about sort of like the carrying capacity of the fact that we're 7 square miles, and I feel like I hear so much about, oh, we're going to solve the housing crisis by adding more housing, and then I'm sort of like, I ride my bike around these streets with some very frustrated motorists very often, and if we're building more market rate housing, we're likely getting people who want to keep their cars, and it just seems like, I don't know where in this conversation there's talk about straining on resources, and I'm wondering if from your experience with sort of these like hack the housing, like agendas, where that lies and what sort of solutions might be developed around that.
My quick reaction to that is that I think that the answer to that question lies outside of the city, and it lies in retrofitting the suburban landscape and doing the development there and doing the housing there and making those places viable and walkable and livable and bikeable, as much as it is putting more housing in the city. But that's my opinion.
I mean, that might be one solution.
Actually, you never know. I mean, depends on what happens with my rent control apartment and my fiance. Frankly, yeah, the answer is maybe. And if, and I part of me would love to sort of be a pioneer in an environment like that. I mean, depending on certain factors, and certainly other people would be willing to do it if the price was right and if it was a little bit, more desirable than it currently is, I think.
You're absolutely right. This is not a let's figure out how we can shoehorn everyone into the city solution. It's a regional issue. It's not just about housing, it's about transportation. It's about transportation within the city, it's about transportation beyond the city. I mean, think about it, like there are some parts of Oakland and Marin and the peninsula that it's easier to get to than outer edges of the city. So if it was easier to live in outer neighborhoods and get downtown and get to places where the jobs are and where people want to go out at night, that would become more attractive. I think there definitely is room for more density in the city, and I know that depending on what your neighborhood you're in, there could be more of a backlash for that. But yeah, I mean, and I don't know about you, but I have a lot of friends who are moving to Oakland, and they like it there. And it's not about, how can we convince people to do this? They're already doing it, but how can we make it easier for them to go back and forth? Because maybe they still work here, or they have community ties here, or they've been volunteering at such and such an organization for 10 years and they want to continue doing that. So how can we make it easier so that the distance from one neighborhood to another, or one city to another is not such an obstacle? And I think that definitely addresses some of it. But we do need more housing. We need more below market rate housing.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what happens when BRT runs out along Geary.
What's the actual timeline of that? I mean, it's still just a concept, right?
I think they get the Van Ness one done first. Yeah. But back to this idea of like people moving here and they have wealth and so they're keeping their cars. I mean, I've been out in the western part of the city pretty recently. There's a heck of a lot of car culture out there, that exists. I don't think that's something that's just with the tech. I think that's just a fundamental issue around priorities of our city planning. I think it's slowly when you see like, okay, we're going to have a BRT built. That's something. But yeah, that issue of the built environment. How are we going to support people? How are we going to build more green space to keep up with the people that are coming places? I think that's important. But one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because I think there's it's on us, it's on me, to create the forums for this kind of collaboration. And I think there's enough people who are interested in doing it that it's not that's not just a couple people tilting at windmills. I think it's having a lot of people frustrated about the housing issue is much better than only having a handful of people frustrated about the housing issue. It doesn't necessarily mean the solution is that, or a solution, or some solutions are right there on their fingertips. But there certainly are a lot of people who are having conversations about it, and it's not just housing activists. And people are really realizing the interconnectivity of these issues. Talking about poverty cannot happen without talking about affordable housing. And that's, I think, something that wasn't necessarily obvious in the past. I think people again had their pet issues. We want to make sure that people don't go hungry. We want to make sure that kids have access to good education. They need a place to live as well. And so I think the interconnectivity of these issues happening at the same time that it's crucial and absolutely critical that we have an interconnectivity of the communities that make up this city. Whether it's tech sector folks, whether it's arts folks, whether it's people in education, And so that's where my optimism comes from, is that I'm seeing, that it's up to us to do that and to create that mechanism. If there was no goodwill, if there wasn't a desire to look for solutions that was coming from a variety of different places, then I don't think I'd be very optimistic. But I think the goodwill is there and the intentions are there. So there's the opportunity to build a mechanism, build an opportunity for people to work together and to find synergies that we haven't seen before. Because we're not going to just doing the same things over and over again is not going to get us there. We're too far behind, I think, on certain issues. So it's going to take some new synergies in order to have some really cool breakthroughs happen.
It's interesting too. I think I mentioned there are several issues coming up on the ballot related to housing, and because the public press tends to focus a lot on public policy. There's one I think proposed by Jane Kim that is looking to allow city-owned property that had been previously designated for other uses to be repurposed for housing, both low income and I think low and middle income, and also some housing I think for formerly homeless people. There's the mission issue, I believe, formerly the one that wants to stop market rate construction until there's a plan for the mission. And I believe the plan needs to be in place by the beginning of 2017. And then there's another one that is escaping right now. Does anybody remember what the third one is? There's actually a bond. There's one about increasing that's about the Mission Bay.
Exactly.
Yeah, about increasing height limits for that. And then there's a housing bond, I believe. So it's not all up to tech to come up with the solutions. However, I would be interested to know and see how which of these initiatives, tech and other business interests are behind or opposing. So,
who's next?
Yeah, so you guys have both talked about something really interesting. One is that everyone's frustrated with housing, and that applies to 20-something tech companies too, which I'm a 20-something.
It's true. Even if you make $100,000 in the city, it's still actually difficult.
Right, but there's also an attitude where people just say, well, I have no choice. Like, this is where I live, I'm employed here, I have to pay free tech, And then I think what you said is really interesting, that a lot of these are actually up for decision in ballot initiatives. So how do you activate those people who are frustrated about their situation, young, and also probably aren't people who are actually participating in local ballot initiatives, right? Because we know that that's not 20-something. So that seems like a big opportunity, like activate those frustrated people and actually get them to participate in local decision making. So how do you make that happen, and how do you kind of focus it on that more grassroots instead of starting with their employers and starting with actual employees?
It's a really good question.
Get involved or inform yourself, find out what's out there. You're exactly what you're saying. You said, I'm interested in this, I want to know more, I don't know where to get involved. You're all on Facebook and Twitter. You can find the people who are already doing things, and you can find the groups that are doing things that align with your values and the impact things that are meaningful for you, the impact that and influence you want to have on the community. You don't have to start it from scratch. If you're inspired to start something from scratch, maybe that feels right for you, and maybe you get a group of friends together and then you align with other groups that are doing things in the same vein. I don't know, does that answer, or is that?
Well, I'm more asking, I think I can do that, but how do you correct the fact that in reality, most young people are not participating in local politics and local decision making? I mean, so I guess I'm saying, instead of focusing on the leaders of tech companies, is there some opportunity in focusing on those hundreds of thousands of employees and getting them to make, actually impact those decisions, and even put upward pressure on their employers and saying, like, we all voted for this, and your policies aren't aligning with what we all want, which is more affordable housing.
I have an answer for that.
Go for it.
Because I just moved here from New York, which is in San Francisco. When I moved there when I was 20 years old, and we had 4 girls living in a 1-bedroom apartment that we had railroaded the living room into like the sheets. Disgusting. But New York is trying some interesting things. They're bringing young people, young 20-somethings, actively onto the different community boards, which is something that they have never done before. And all the community boards used to be run by old white men in their 80s. So by bringing on these 20-somethings, that they're super aware about these small-time, and they are small-time ballot initiatives. They're bringing their friends, and they're blowing all their friends. I don't know if that's happening in San Francisco, but I know that it's made a huge difference in some of the more emerging neighborhoods in New York, especially in Queens. That's a lot of the reason that a lot of the 20-somethings are living out in Queens and in the more emerging neighborhoods in Brooklyn, but then also in places like Harlem and in Manhattan. So being in San Francisco adopting that.
It's a good idea. That's actually super fundamental. Do you guys know anything that's going on here that's along those lines? And I mean, to add, it still has to be so regional here because San Francisco's, what's distinct from New York is that New York is 10 times the size of San Francisco. So the outer boroughs of New York are like, you know, Walnut Creek from here, you know, but yet it's still under the aegis of one city government. Whereas here you have this massive disparity of multiple counties and everything else. But despite that complication, have you guys been aware of anything like that?
As far as aware of things that are specifically activating young voters, I think there's 2 things. There's, you know, the League of Pissed Off Voters, and there's some other sort of things modeled after community, you know, sort of neighborhood groups that are sort of engaging more young voters than others are. You know, I think some of the technology is being directed that way. I mean, Act On is an app. We've got some folks here that is specifically about, you know, how to get plugged into to issues, and how to make that part of the news you're digesting and provide opportunities to act and to take action. And I think also, you know, the emphasis on volunteerism is one of the ways we're breaking down this, okay, I'm a worker, but, you know, I'm a tech worker, but I can't, I don't have an avenue to find out about these things. If volunteering and working with nonprofits that are deep in these issues is built into your work culture, then that provides a natural engagement ladder for learning about the issues, for learning about different mechanisms, for connecting with other people who can be your, you know, you're at work and you have your mentors around your professional goals. You know, by volunteering, connecting with other folks, you can have, you can meet your mentors who will be your social issue mentors and be the people that you find out about issues. And I think as we can become more connected, then that's the option. I think, you know, how to activate 25-year-old voters, I think is not a new question. So it's just a new time to figure out ways to do it. And I think, so there is no easy answer. If there was, I'd be a very sought after campaign manager.
And actually, it's funny you mentioned.
Hello. It's funny that you mentioned League of Pissed Off Voters, and for that matter, there's a lot about that. I mean, as far as engaging young people in this city, you know, it's got to be way above average in terms of people that are actually paying attention to politics, especially local politics. I mean, you mentioned biking. I mean, the SF Bike Coalition is unbelievable how effective that organization is, as well as the renters, some of the rent advocacy groups and so on and so forth. And that's reaching people from all ages and demographics and so on. So I think that actually I'm kind of optimistic about that, at least in this city. And perhaps there's a way to engage. If I were to do something, I would engage with those various organizations rather than necessarily just throw up my hands and say, hey, 20-somethings, come pay attention and do something. Because there are a lot of organizations that are pretty engaged, don't you think?
Yeah, I do think there are a lot of young people who are engaged, and maybe the ones who aren't, it's probably because they are new to town and they don't know where to go. I think, I don't know about you guys, but within every friend group, I think there's always the person who's the most engaged, and that person is often pulling their friends along and saying, hey, you got to come to this thing. We're going to study the ballot. We're going to, go hear this debate and this speaker. And I guess the question is like, how, when you say how do, the question is who's trying to do it and what's their motivation,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Well, and so like I would think one answer would be the tech companies we're talking about should shut down for a day and say like everyone needs to go vote today instead of coming to work, right? Like, do you think that? Because I know that they do that in elementary schools and parents get so.
Well, I love the idea of mandated.
You can't come to work until you vote.
No, but if we're saying like they have a responsibility to make people invest in the community, then maybe it's that, or say it's a work from home day at Twitter today, because we know that, I don't know.
It's all good. It's all good ideas. So we're coming down to the time. Does anyone have a short and sweet last question to ask? Judy's got one. Shortish.
I wanted to respond and say, I think it's a little bit of a generalization that people are activated because we are seeing movements on college campuses, for example, on like divestment, and obviously the Bay Area was very well known for a lot of social rights movements, people being activated. But what I want to ask you is, or open to the floor, is if, because I think your question was whether or not the tech companies have a role in this, like activating young people who work. And maybe it's, every company usually has some sort of employee engagement, or maybe this falls under HR. And maybe that is something that tech companies could take on. It's like, here are things that are happening in your local area. Like, there's always some sort of employee newsletter, some sort of email that goes out. I love your idea about shit. I mean, I think that since Bernie Sanders putting like something about making voting a national holiday.
Which it is.
Oh, that's gonna, yeah, it is in a lot of countries. That's right. And
Yeah. I think really to Rob's point.
A lot of countries it's actually mandatory too.
Yeah. About like the interconnectedness is that the idea that it's government's job, or it's the media's job to activate or whatever, that maybe you all have a role in this. Maybe that's something that you can suggest to your company, and just like, hey, there's obviously all these things that are happening in this region that people are talking about. I mean, it's national and international news. So what can we do? You wouldn't be here if you weren't concerned about it. I guess that's not a question.
That's totally fine. So guys, but Judy, that's very much in the spirit of tonight's, in the spirit of tonight, which is really about a conversation, which really I think we've just gotten started. And that was pretty much what I expected would happen tonight. I mean, this is not a night to necessarily solve problems, but it's to stimulate some conversations. And as Jen mentioned, as we wrap it up here, we're gonna be keeping this going for about 6 months through this big in-depth series that we're launching on TriplePundit. It's gonna launch probably about a month and a half from now. You can see a whole bunch of information about it on the site. You can check it out. As we build this topic up, we're going to be looking for your input, your thoughts. If you're a writer, we could possibly have you on as a guest to continue to share your thoughts, and we hope that you will follow along as we do that. This is just a big, terrific topic that's a lot deeper than just San Francisco and a lot deeper than the tech community. It's very fundamental to what we're all about. And with that, I want to thank our two panelists, Lila and Rob, for taking the time to join us this evening. And thanks to all of you guys for coming by. We'll hang out for just a little bit. There's still some more beer left if you want to grab one and keep the conversation going for 20 more minutes or so. But other than that, thanks so much for coming. Next month, we will be back on the 24th of September. We're going to be talking about travel, responsible travel, sustainable travel, ecotourism, the positive economic benefits of international travel. It's going to be really cool. It's going to be a much bigger event. You'll be seeing that on TriplePundit as well. So please join us then. Thanks a lot for coming.